Snow fell like ashes from a sky long tired of watching people suffer. She came from the east with nothing but a suitcase and a name someone else gave her. Clara May. The name fit like a threadbare shawl, functional, not warm. She'd folded her past inside that case. The sooty windows of the Baltimore orphanage, the hands that reached but never held, the letters she'd written to men with coin and promises and lonely porches in far-off places. One had answered, a miner named Jeremiah Pike. He'd written in hard, slanted ink that he'd seen enough of wolves and wind, and wanted a woman to cook and bear and sit quiet by his fire. Clara said yes, not because she believed him, but because no other name had come. Now the world was white and treacherous. The wagon had left her at Clearwater Fork 3 hours before the storm hit. A parting gesture that felt more like abandonment than arrival. She'd stepped into the cold with directions scrawled on damp paper and a bundle of borrowed bread, following the pine-lined path that led to nowhere she could yet see. The cold gnawed through her boots by the second hour. By the third, she could no longer feel her feet. Snow gathered on her lashes. Her suitcase handle had snapped earlier, somewhere near a frozen creek she couldn't now find again. So she dragged the case behind her like an old wound, too precious to leave behind, too painful to carry. The woods grew thicker. There were no signs. No smoke curling from chimneys. No boot prints ahead, only the wind's wild scrawl. Her limbs began to betray her, stumbling, fumbling. She fell once, then again, and each time it took more will to rise. Still, she whispered her new name like a prayer. Clara May. Clara May. Don't stop now, girl. She didn't know when she finally gave in. One moment she was walking. The next her knees met the frozen ground. The snow welcomed her down, cradled her like a mother who'd forgiven everything. Her fingers twitched in the whiteness, reaching for nothing. Somewhere in her drifting mind, she thought she heard a bell. No, a howl. Far off, torn by wind. She closed her eyes. The last thing she remembered was the taste of iron in her throat and a thought. Maybe Jeremiah had never been real. Maybe no one was coming. But something did come. Ash was an old hound, ghost-colored and mountain-bred, with ears trained to every whisper the forest made. He trotted down the ridge on instinct, his nose twitching toward the scent of something fragile. Boone followed, rifle across his back, snow clinging to his beard. He was a man carved out of winter, tall, silent, shoulders like tree trunks, and though he'd not spoken a full sentence in days, his eyes said more than his mouth ever did. He saw her. She was half buried, curls stiff with frost, breath so faint it barely stirred the air. Boone dropped to one knee beside her, brushing snow from her cheek. A spark of heat under skin told him she hadn't crossed over yet. He didn't ask who she was, didn't look for a note, didn't question the absurdity of a woman alone this far into winter. He just gathered her into his arms. Clara didn't feel the lift. Only that, suddenly, the cold no longer hurt. That something warmer than death pressed close to her heart. And that a scent, not a man's, but cedar, smoke, and dog, followed her into the dark. The cabin sat at the base of Blackwood Hill, wrapped in snow like a secret. Boone built it himself after the war and after Eliza. 2 losses that taught him silence was easier than hope. He stoked the hearth, laid Clara gently on the cot, and stripped the frozen coat from her shoulders. Her feet were near blue. Her lips cracked like dry earth. Ash whined softly, pacing. Boone worked without speaking. Melted snow on the stove. Rubbed warmth back into her limbs with worn flannel. He found salve for the frostbite. Fed her broth by the spoonful once she stirred. Hours passed. She muttered things in her sleep. Names, maybe. Apologies. A song he half recognized from the old country. She had no ring. The storm howled outside like a beast denied its prey. Inside, there was only the fire, and the woman slowly returning to life. When Clara woke, it was night again. Shadows played across the beams above her, cast by flames that moved like dancers. The blanket was wool, thick and hand-stitched. Her suitcase sat beside the hearth, thawing like a forgotten relic. She turned her head and saw the man. He sat in a chair near the window, whittling a piece of wood with methodical patience. His face was stone, lined and rough, the color of pine bark in moonlight. He looked up, and their eyes met. She tried to speak. He raised a hand, not unkindly, and pointed toward the mug of water beside her. She reached. Her fingers trembled. He watched, but didn't move to help. That was the first thing she liked about him. They didn't speak for 2 days. Not because words weren't welcome, but because they weren't yet needed. Boone mended traps, chopped wood, left warm meals and tea on the table. Clara, wrapped in quiet, observed. She noted how he moved through the space like someone who'd never expected company. She noted the photograph of a woman by the bed, faded, worn, framed in carved birch. She didn't ask. On the third day, her voice returned, brittle but clear. I was supposed to marry a man named Jeremiah Pike, she said. Boone turned slowly, set down the tin plate in his hands. Didn't show? No. He nodded once. No surprise in his eyes. Clara's breath caught. Did you know him? Boone didn't lie, but he didn't answer either. She looked away, cheeks burning. Foolish. So foolish to think a man she'd never met would wait like a promise in the snow. She felt the shame of it settle deep, as if it were her fault he'd not come. As if she were too plain, too broken, too late. He's not worth your breath, Boone said quietly. She looked up. His gaze held no pity, just certainty. Thank you. He nodded again, went back to the wood. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, counting the knots in the timber. Ash snored softly by the door. Boone's boots rested beside the hearth. She thought of the letter, Jeremiah's, still in her pocket, unopened, water-damaged. She pulled it out, unfolding the damp corners. Half the ink had run. Only a few words remained. Can't wait. Other plans, you'll manage, I reckon. She folded it again, slid it into the fire, watched it curl and blacken until it was nothing but smoke. In the flickering light, Boone said from his chair, You don't owe him your sorrow. She met his eyes across the room. I don't think I do. His face didn't change, but she saw the tension ease from his shoulders. They sat in silence. A silence full, not empty. Outside, the storm passed. Inside, something began. Not loud, not sudden, but sure, like the first crack of ice before the thaw. And just before sleep claimed her again, Clara whispered into the warm hush. My name is Clara May. Boone didn't reply, but he looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she felt seen. Not as freight lost in the cold, not as a burden, but as something that had survived, and might bloom yet. The fire didn't answer, but it burned steady through the night. Boone was a man of habit. He rose before the frost cracked the cabin windows, boiled water, set snares in the low groves where rabbits still dared to move. His boots carved the same prints each morning, and Ash trotted behind, silent as a ghost. But now, a new shape lingered in the cabin's rhythm, softer, slower, unsure of its place. Clara moved through the space like someone afraid of waking it. She rose once Boone had gone, folded the wool blanket neatly, washed her own bowl without being asked. Her body still ached from the cold's kiss, and her fingers bore blisters from firewood too rough for hands that once knew sewing needles better. But each day, she grew steadier, like someone remembering her own weight. She didn't ask to stay. Boone didn't offer. But the silence stretched itself between them like a quilt, stitched with shared gestures. A second plate placed at the table, kindling left by the stove, a loaf of bread wrapped in clean linen. Neither said what it meant. They didn't need to. By the fifth morning, she dared to ask, Do you ever see anyone out here? Boone looked up from the snare line he was tying. Sometimes. Maggie Downridge comes with salt. Eli, the postman, when weather allows. She nodded, lips pressing into a line. Do they know I'm here? He paused, then shook his head. Not yet. She wasn't sure if that was comfort or warning. The days bent into each other like trees under snowfall, indistinct but weighted. Boone taught her to mend traps, showed her how to split wood with shoulders straight, not arms alone. She watched the way he handled everything, deliberate, respectful, as though each motion deserved its full measure of care. He never asked about her life before the snow, never pried, but he listened when she spoke, not with interruptions, but with stillness. My mother died in summer, Clara said once, fingers brushing the frost from the windowsill. She was afraid of horses, but she loved thunder. Boone stirred the stew and nodded. A quiet, like understanding passed between them. In the evenings, they shared warmth, but not stories. Boone carved wood animals for the shelf above the hearth, a fox, a crow, a sleeping bear. Clara read from one of the 3 books on the shelf, her voice tentative but steady. Once, she dared a smile when Boone chuckled at a mispronounced word. It felt like spring inside her chest, though the world outside lay locked in ice. But the thaw was not without unease. Clara woke one night to a sound. Not a howl, not wind. A name, spoken low, Eliza. She didn't move, didn't ask. She simply closed her eyes again and let the fire's glow cradle them both in silence. The next morning, Boone avoided her gaze. Later, as they chopped wood, Clara asked what no one else might. Was she your wife? Boone's axe halted mid-swing. He nodded once. She died. Childbirth. Clara didn't reply, but she laid a hand on the birch handle, not to stop him, just to steady. Some things don't need more than that. That afternoon, Boone showed her how to shoot. The rifle was heavy, colder than she expected. Her first shot missed by a wide mile and startled every crow from the trees. Boone chuckled low in his throat. The second hit bark. The third, a branch. He didn't praise her, but when she handed it back, he nodded. Not bad, Clara May. The way he said her name made her feel like it belonged to her again. One day, a letter arrived. Old Eli came hunched through the snow, gray coat soaked, beard a garden of icicles. He offered Boone a weathered envelope and winked at Clara, eyes twinkling like a boy's. Maggie says there's rumors in town. Someone saw a woman heading up this way. Pretty, looked half dead, they said. Clara stiffened. Boone took the letter, lips drawn. You know anything about that? Eli asked. Just snow and quiet, Boone replied. Same as always. Eli chuckled, tipped his hat, and vanished back down the hill. The letter sat untouched on the table all day. Clara picked it up at dusk, when Boone was outside splitting wood. It was addressed to Jeremiah Pike. She turned it over. There was no sender. Only her own name, scrawled faintly in the return corner, an echo of hope long buried. She took it outside. Boone paused mid-swing, watching. You knew him, didn't you? Boone exhaled, setting the axe aside. I knew of him. He was trouble when sober. Worse when not. Clara's hands trembled around the letter. He said he'd marry me. Said he had a cabin, a job. Said he was waiting. Boone looked at her then, not with pity, but something else. A sorrow too deep to speak. He married someone else. A saloon girl named Dottie. Last spring. The words didn't hurt as much as she expected. Maybe because she'd already guessed. Maybe because betrayal only echoes where hope still lives. She nodded once, looked down at the letter, then held it to the flame. Boone didn't stop her, didn't say a word as it curled black and vanished. Later that evening, they shared stew in silence. Boone's dog curled beneath the table. Snow tapped soft rhythms against the pane. You don't have to stay here, Boone said, not quite looking at her. Clara stirred her spoon. I don't have anywhere else. That's not the same thing. She looked up, eyes steady. I know, but I want to be here. Boone didn't smile, but his shoulders lowered, like someone setting down something heavy. She stood slowly, walked to the hearth, and placed the last of the biscuits on a cloth. The cabin no longer felt borrowed. Still, Clara knew things could shift. Snow melted. Rivers swelled. Men changed. That night, she dreamed of hands, not grasping, but holding. She woke with her heart still warm from it. The next morning, Boone gave her a gift. Wrapped in old linen was a worn leather journal, the spine softened from years of handling. Inside, the name Eliza Boone was written in looping script. Beneath it, empty pages, yellow with age. She looked up at him, questioning. She wrote poems, but never got to fill it. Clara traced the first blank page with her fingers. Boone spoke low, like someone afraid the cold might steal the words. Maybe it's time it had a second voice. She swallowed past the lump in her throat, then closed the book gently, holding it to her chest like a heartbeat. They didn't speak the rest of the day, but their silence felt warmer than some conversations ever had. Outside, snow fell slow and steady, blanketing the land in softness. Inside, something small had taken root. Not love, not yet, but the kind of trust that might become it. And that night, as the fire dimmed and the wind curled gentle against the cabin walls, Boone looked at her, really looked, and for a moment, Clara felt as though her name was a song, and someone had finally learned the tune. She whispered into the hush, I want to stay, not because I must, but because I can. Boone didn't reply, but he stayed by the fire a little longer than usual, and that was answer enough. The days softened. Where once Clara had moved through Boone's cabin like a guest in borrowed shoes, she now walked it barefoot, her presence no longer an interruption but a thread woven into the place. Her hair no longer stiff with frost, her cheeks pink with warmth, her hands accustomed to the grain of split wood and the heat of iron skillets. Each morning, She rose before the snow glow touched the windows and lit the fire he used to light alone. Boone, for his part, spoke more, not in great floods, but in careful offerings. A story about a fox he once tracked across the ridge. A memory of his mother's bread, always burned at the edges. How Eliza used to hum when she worked, not sing, just hum, like she was trying not to disturb the dust. And Clara listened, not like someone seeking secrets, but like someone learning the shape of another soul. One morning, after a thaw had turned the path to the creek into slush, Boone found her out near the edge of the trees, sketching with a bit of charcoal on birch bark. She didn't hide it, held it out for him to see. A drawing of the cabin, quiet beneath snowfall, smoke from the chimney curling like a question mark. "It's good," he said, surprised. Clara smiled. "I like drawing things that feel safe." He didn't say it, but her meaning echoed in the pause between their breaths. There were still no words like love between them, no talk of forever. They moved in gestures, a coat draped over a chair, a mug filled before it was asked for, a hand resting just a second longer than necessary on the table. The fire burned warmer in those weeks, and not because of the kindling. Still, a shadow trailed them. It came one evening in the form of Ash's low growl, deep in the dog's chest as the wind shifted. Boone stiffened, reached for his rifle not with panic, but practiced dread. "Stay inside," he told Clara. She stood anyway, breath tight. Through the trees, hoofbeats. Then voices, loud, crude, familiar in a way that made Clara's stomach twist. 3 men emerged from the woods, horses muddied to the knee, coats open like they feared no cold. One had a scar across his cheek like lightning frozen in flesh. Another wore a bowler hat too fine for these hills. The third, young, soft-eyed, looked as though he'd followed by mistake. Boone stepped outside, rifle lowered, but not forgotten. "Evenin'," the scarred man called. "We're looking for someone." Boone didn't move. "This ain't a boarding house." The man grinned, teeth yellow as corn husks. "No offense. Just heard a girl came this way. Pale thing alone. Might have gone by Clara." Boone's silence cracked like ice underfoot. "And if she did?" The man's grin widened. "Then we'd like a word." Her fiancé's mighty worried. Behind Boone, Clara's breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the wood of the door. She stepped forward. "I'm not his fiancé." The 3 men looked up in unison. Scarred man raised an eyebrow. "Well, darlin', that ain't what Jeremiah said." Boone moved, quiet and sure, stepping between them. "She's not going with you." The man chuckled. "You ain't the law, Hunter." "No," Boone said, calm. "But I know this land better than your kind. And you're not walking her out of it." The silence that followed was thick with threat. Then the younger man shifted, nervous. "Let's just go, Wes. If she don't want to come." "Shut up," the leader snapped. But the wind was rising, and Ash had stepped forward now, low and growling. Scarred man hesitated, spat on the snow. "You'll regret this. Jeremiah don't like being lied to." Boone didn't blink. "I don't like people who drag women through storms." Another beat. Then, slowly, the riders turned. The woods swallowed them again. Boone lowered his rifle. Inside, Clara sat shaking. He found her with her hands wrapped around her knees, back to the hearth. He waited. Then, softly, "He sold the promise of me, Boone. That's all I ever was to him. A transaction. A woman with no kin and soft hands. When he didn't show, I thought maybe I was lucky. But now now he knows where I am." Boone crouched beside her, his voice a low ember. "He won't find you again. You don't know that. I know the trees, the land, the way winter keeps secrets. And I know what kind of man I am when someone tries to take what's mine." Clara looked up, heart trembling. "What am I to you?" He didn't answer, but his hand brushed hers, slow, deliberate, full of meaning. That night, she wrote in Eliza's journal for the first time. Some things grow in places they shouldn't. In ice, in silence, in the empty space between 2 strangers who stopped being strangers. The snow kept falling, but softer now. They spent the next week waiting, watching. Clara didn't leave the cabin alone. Boone checked traps twice a day, always returning with a glance that told her it was still safe. Ash slept near the door. The woods were quiet, too quiet, perhaps, but peace clung stubbornly to the edges of their world. Until the 13th day, Boone came back without a word. Blood on his sleeve. A shallow cut, already crusting. "They were watching from the ridge," he said. Clara's breath turned to ice. "What do? We prepare." And they did. Boone reinforced the door. loaded powder, placed signals along the tree line. Clara helped, hands no longer hesitant but sure. The fear still lived in her chest, but it did not own her anymore. On the 15th morning, she found a single boot print by the stream. They were closer now. She sat at the hearth that night, writing again. He gave me nothing but silence, and somehow, that silence became sanctuary. I do not want to run anymore. She turned. Boone stood behind her, watching. Come spring, he said, voice hoarse, we could build a second room. For you. If you wanted it. Clara closed the journal. Touched his hand. I don't want to sleep anywhere you're not. He looked down, as if afraid of breaking something delicate. I ain't much for poetry, Clara May. But I reckon the way you look at me is the closest I'll ever come to being in one. She stepped close, pressed her forehead to his. Then let's make our own. Outside, the moon shone cold and clear. The forest held its breath. Inside, the fire danced in their shadows. It was not safety they had found. Not yet. But it was something like home. And home, she thought, was worth defending. Dawn arrived wrapped in silence. But it was not peace. The air held a tension that the snow could not bury. It crackled just beneath the skin, a pulse in the throat of the woods. Boone knew it before he stepped outside. Knew it in the way Ash stood rigid at the door, ears forward, nose to wind. The way birds had vanished from the trees. The forest was holding its breath. Clara stood behind him, wrapped in his old coat, her fingers curled tightly in the sleeve. She did not speak. She didn't need to. Boone gave a small nod, once, then stepped into the snow. Tracks. Many. Pressed deep into the white, still fresh. He followed them a short way, rifle slung low, eyes narrowing. 3 horses again. The prints were careless. Angry. Close. They would come today. He returned to the cabin and met her gaze. It's time. They moved in rhythm now. Not fast, but without hesitation. Clara checked the kettle on the hearth, then moved to the loft, where she had laid the extra blankets and ammo. Boone nailed a length of wood across the lower shutters. When he passed her the small revolver, the one she had only used in practice, she took it without question. Neither said goodbye to the quiet. There was no time. The storm hit before the riders. It came fast, wind sweeping across the ridge like a warning howl. The snow fell sideways, blinding wild. It wrapped the world in white rage. But they came through it anyway. Boone saw them first, shadows in the trees, flickering like wolves through brush. He pulled Clara behind the stove, pressed a hand to her shoulder. Don't shoot unless you have to. She nodded, breath shallow. Ash began to growl low, then louder. The first voice pierced the wind. Clara, come out now. Ain't no point in making this ugly. She flinched. That's Wes, she whispered. He speaks for Jeremiah. Boone moved to the narrow window, rifle steady. Snow obscured all but shapes. 3 men, 1 horse tethered back. The scarred one, Wes, in front. Boone stepped to the door. Your business is done, he called. You can ride out, or you can bleed. We got a contract, Wes yelled. Mail order bride, remember? Legal and witnessed. That girl's a promise. She ain't a parcel, Boone growled. Silence. Then, you think she's yours now, Hunter? Think some long winter makes you her man? You think you're worth more than Jeremiah Pike? I know what I'm worth, Boone said. Do you? The first shot rang out, sharp and sudden. Splintered wood flew from the porch post. Boone dropped low, heart calm, ears tuned. Clara was behind him. Still. Ready. Another shot. Ash barked, not a warning, but a command, and lunged toward the back door. They're flanking, Boone muttered. Stay down. He moved like breath, out the side, into the trees, boots crunching softly beneath the storm. He saw the youngest of them, the soft-eyed one, circling wide, gun drawn but shaking. Go home, Boone called. The boy froze. This ain't your fight. The boy didn't lower the weapon, but he didn't fire either. Boone stepped close enough to see the snow in his lashes. You want to die for Jeremiah Pike? The boy's mouth trembled. No, he whispered. Then run. He did. Boone turned. Too late. Wes charged from the thicket like a boar, gun raised, teeth bared. They collided in the snow. The rifle skidded away. They hit hard, fists landing with bone-breaking weight. Boone caught a punch to the jaw, tasted copper. Drove his knee into Wes's ribs. They rolled, struggling for purchase, breath clouds tangled with curses. Then, a shot. Not Boone's. Wes froze. Blood bloomed on his shoulder, red on white. He turned. Clara stood 10 paces away, revolver still smoking. "Don't touch him," she said. Her voice didn't shake. Wes staggered back, grinning. "You would not have lasted a week with him." Clara's hand didn't move. "I lasted a lifetime with you in just 1 month. I'd take snow and silence over your kind of warmth any day." Wes spat, turned, limped toward the woods. Boone caught Clara as she swayed, the revolver slipping from her fingers. "It's over," he murmured. "No," she breathed. "He'll come again. He won't stop." They returned to the cabin, sealed the wounds. Boone's lips split, Clara's nerves raw. Ash paced for hours before finally curling near the hearth. The wind died down just past dusk. They sat close that night, their hands twined not in passion but in defiance. Clara rested her head on his shoulder. Her voice was tired, but sure. "If we go down this mountain, he'll find me." Boone nodded. "Then we don't go down." Clara looked at him. "You'd stay?" "I already did." She breathed in, slow. The journal rested open on the table, her last entry unfinished. She reached for it now. "We do not choose the fire. Sometimes it chooses us. And still, we burn steady, even under snow." Later, Boone spoke. "We could leave. Head west, past the river. I got a cousin near Ash Fork. Quiet land. Fewer questions." Clara thought of the cabin, of the hush and the hound, and the man who never touched her without reverence. Then she shook her head. "I don't want to run anymore." He looked at her. Really looked. The way a man looks at the last warm light before dark. "Then we stand." They spent the next weeks in slow preparation. Word would reach town. Jeremiah would hear. But so would others, people who knew Boone, who remembered his father, who'd buried a wife on this ridge and never asked the world to pity him. One morning, a parcel arrived. Maggie's handwriting. Inside, a pair of boots Clara had left behind in her rush to flee. And a note. "We see you, girl. We'll help watch your back." Clara wept softly, boots in hand. The land did not forget its own. Spring was weeks off still, but something shifted in the wind. Not warmth, not yet, but the promise of it. They stood together that evening on the porch, Boone's arm around her, Ash at their feet. The forest hushed, but no longer afraid. Some fires, she wrote that night, burn best beneath snow. Hidden, slow, unstoppable. And as the wind wrapped the cabin like a lullaby, she knew. He hadn't saved her. He had seen her, and let her become herself again. And for the first time since that train had left the city, she wasn't waiting to be found. She was already home. And so, dear listener, if you've stayed this long by our quiet fire, let this truth warm you. There are places in this world where silence heals, where wounds bloom into strength, and where even the coldest winters make space for love. If this tale has touched your heart, let us know. Leave a word, a thought, or just a candle emoji in the comments below. Tell us, where are you watching from? We'd love to know whose hearts we've reached, and from what corners of the world you, too, are braving your own winters. And if you believe in soft strength, in quiet courage, in love that grows slow but true, stay with us. More stories wait beyond the snow.